The cafe was a small, cozy place tucked into a quiet street, the kind of place where people came not just for coffee but for the comfort of familiarity. Every morning, sunlight would stream through the large windows, falling on the worn wooden tables and the small upright piano in the corner. Most of the time, the piano went unnoticed. It had been there for years, silent, gathering dust, its black and white keys worn from some forgotten hands. People came and went, paying it little mind, focusing instead on their phones, their newspapers, or the endless chatter of friends and strangers alike. She worked there, moving from table to table, carrying plates, filling mugs, and listening to the murmur of conversations. To anyone watching, she was just a waitress doing her job. She wore a simple uniform, a plain shirt and apron, but there was something gentle in the way she smiled. The way she remembered what a regular customer liked, or how she quietly offered a comforting word to someone who seemed down. Most days were ordinary. She took orders, served meals, cleared tables, and repeated the cycle over and over. And yet there was a part of her that felt out of place, like the soft hum of a melody that didn't quite have a home. It had been years since she had played the piano seriously. Life had a way of pulling her in different directions: bills, responsibilities, family obligations, and the constant pressure to keep moving forward. Music had once been her escape, her joy, the thing that made her feel alive. Back then, she would spend hours practicing, losing herself in the rhythm, the rise and fall of each note. But somewhere along the way, that part of her had been pushed aside. The piano in the cafe had become just another piece of furniture, a silent witness to her quiet, everyday life. On this particular morning, the cafe was busier than usual. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the aroma of warm pastries, filling the air with a sense of comfort. She moved quickly, carrying tray after tray of drinks and food, careful not to spill a drop. Customers smiled and thanked her, some chatting animatedly with friends, others sitting alone in quiet reflection. Her day felt like so many before: routine, predictable, and almost invisible, yet something was different. She caught herself glancing at the piano more often than usual. Its black and white keys seemed to call to her in a way they hadn't in years. She remembered the countless evenings she had spent at a piano like this, her fingers dancing across the keys, creating music that felt bigger than herself. The memory was bittersweet, filled with longing and regret. She wondered if she had forgotten everything. If her hands still remembered the movements, the delicate touch. The feeling of connection that had once seemed unbreakable. As she wiped down a table near the piano, she noticed a small group of regulars settling in at the back. They laughed and joked, oblivious to the quiet tension building inside her. She felt a pang of longing, a tiny spark that refused to be ignored. What would it feel like to play again, even just for a moment? Could she bring herself to do it? The thought made her heart race. A mixture of excitement and fear, the cafe's noise continued around her, the clinking of cups and the low hum of conversation forming a backdrop to her thoughts. She stood there, frozen for a moment, staring at the piano. It was as if it were waiting, patient and silent, offering her a chance she didn't know she deserved. She imagined herself sitting down, pressing the keys, letting the music flow. She imagined the sound filling the room, cutting through the chatter, reaching people in ways words never could, but doubt crept in as it always did. What if she wasn't good enough anymore? What if she had lost the touch, the skill, the magic? What if people laughed or judged her? These questions had held her back for years, keeping her from taking risks, keeping her safe in her routine. She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away, but the pull was too strong. Something inside her refused to let the moment pass unnoticed. A lull in the cafe gave her a moment of quiet. She carried a plate to a table, smiled at the customer, nodded politely, and then found herself drifting back toward the piano. Her hands itched to touch the keys, though she tried to keep them folded at her sides. She inhaled deeply, trying to calm the rush of nerves, telling herself it was just a whim, a fleeting thought. And yet she could feel the music calling, the old passion stirring like a long-lost friend knocking gently at her door. She paused in front of the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her mind raced with memories of lessons, recitals, and quiet evenings spent in the glow of a single lamp, the piano beneath her hands. She remembered the feeling of music flowing through her, of losing herself in sound, of connecting with something beyond the ordinary. That feeling had never truly left her, even if life had forced her to ignore it. The customers at nearby tables were absorbed in their own worlds, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding just feet away. A group of friends laughed over shared jokes. A couple whispered softly across the table, and a man scrolled through his phone, oblivious to the potential magic in the room. She could almost feel the piano waiting, patient, urging her to take the first step. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment where she could either stay in her safe routine or risk stepping into something bigger, something unforgettable. She swallowed hard and, with a mixture of fear and determination, took a seat on the piano bench. The wood was cool beneath her, familiar and comforting. She rested her fingers lightly on the keys, testing them gently. The sound was clear, warm, and inviting. Just as she remembered, the cafe seemed to pause for a heartbeat, though no one else noticed. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of her past performances wash over her. Her fingers remembered the movements, the flow, the rhythm. The first note she played was soft, almost hesitant, but it carried a warmth that made her heart swell. She played another note, then another, each one building on the last, tentative at first, then gradually more confident. Something shifted inside her as she played. The nerves began to fade, replaced by the pure joy of creating music. The melody that had been trapped in her for so long started to emerge, delicate and emotional yet powerful enough to fill the cafe. She felt herself disappearing into the music, forgetting the customers, the tables, the routine that had defined her life for so long. It was just her and the piano, connected in a way she hadn't felt in years. People started to notice. At first, it was subtle, a pause in conversation, a curious glance toward the piano. Then the whispers began. "Is she really playing? I didn't know she could do that." Eyes turned, phones were lowered, and slowly the cafe became still. The music had cut through the noise, reaching everyone in the room. There was a sense of wonder, of disbelief, as if they were witnessing something rare and beautiful that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The waitress continued, her fingers moving with a confidence that surprised even her. Each note carried emotion, telling a story that words could never express. She played not for recognition, not for praise, but simply because she had to. The music was part of her, a part that had been silenced for too long, and now it demanded to be heard. As the melody continued, she caught glimpses of reactions around her. A customer wiped away a tear, another leaned forward, completely absorbed. Even those who had barely noticed her before were now captivated, drawn into the world she was creating. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, seen not just as a waitress, but as a person with talent, passion, and depth. The piano, once a forgotten piece of furniture, had become a bridge between her and the world. In that quiet, bustling cafe, a moment of magic had begun to unfold, one that no one would forget. And although the day had started like any other, she knew something had changed, not just in the cafe, but within herself. After the first few notes, she felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The sound of the piano had returned to her like a forgotten friend, and it was stronger than she remembered. She could feel her fingers moving almost automatically, as if they remembered what to do even when her mind doubted. There was a rhythm, a pattern, a flow that made her heart race with a kind of joy she hadn't felt in years. For a moment, she forgot everything else, the customers, the plates she had to carry, the orders she needed to take. The cafe was no longer a place of routine. It had become a stage, and she was the performer. The notes she played were soft at first, delicate, almost shy, but they carried emotion. Every press of a key seemed to tell a story. Memories of childhood, of evenings spent practicing for hours in silence, of small victories and disappointments, all came flooding back. She remembered the thrill of learning a new piece, the frustration when her fingers didn't obey, and the pride when she finally got it right. Music had always been more than sound. It was a way to express what words could not. And now, sitting at the old piano, She felt that expression returning to her like a tide that could not be stopped around her. The cafe buzzed with the usual morning energy, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, people began to notice. A man sitting with a cup of coffee paused mid-sip, staring at the piano in surprise. A woman at the corner table lowered her book, her eyes widening as she recognized the melody filling the room. The soft chatter quieted. Conversations faded as the music took over, wrapping the cafe in a gentle, almost magical atmosphere. She kept her eyes on the keys, but she was aware of the shift happening around her. The piano had transformed from a forgotten object into a source of connection. People who had barely acknowledged her presence were now looking up, drawn in by the sound, captivated by the skill and emotion coming from the simple waitress who had seemed so ordinary just moments before. The realization hit her slowly, making her hands tremble slightly. She was being heard, truly heard, for the first time in a long while. As she continued to play, her confidence grew. Each note became stronger, more deliberate, flowing naturally from one to the next. She didn't need to think about the technicalities, the rhythm, the timing, the melody. All of it came naturally, guided by years of practice and a deep love for music. She felt her body relax, her mind calm, as she surrendered completely to the moment. For her, the piano was more than an instrument. It was a bridge to something greater, something beyond the ordinary worries and routines of life. The customers' reactions continued to shift. Some were leaning forward, their elbows on the tables, completely focused on the music. Others had stopped their conversations entirely, letting the melody take over their attention. A few even whispered to each other, surprised by the talent they had never noticed before. There was a sense of collective wonder, a shared moment of beauty that connected everyone in the room. The cafe, usually a place of scattered conversations and hurried movements, had become a small sanctuary where time seemed to slow. If only for a few minutes, she noticed a young boy at a table near the piano, sitting quietly with his mother. He had been fidgeting with a toy, restless and distracted, but as the music filled the room, he stopped moving. His eyes were wide, focused on the piano, and she could see a look of awe on his face. It reminded her of herself as a child, discovering music for the first time, feeling the thrill of creation and the joy of listening. In that moment, she realized that the impact of music was not just in the notes, it was in the way it touched people. In the way it could pause their world and make them feel something real. Her thoughts wandered for a moment, and she allowed herself to remember why she had stopped playing in the first place. Life had become demanding. Responsibilities piled up, and slowly the piano was set aside. There were bills to pay, family matters to attend to, and endless tasks that seemed more urgent than her own passion. She had buried the music deep inside her, thinking she didn't have time for it, thinking it was impractical. But now, sitting at the piano, she realized that passion could not be ignored forever. It had waited patiently, ready to return when the time was right. The cafe owner, a kind woman who had always appreciated her dedication, was watching from behind the counter. She had noticed the subtle shift, the way customers had stopped and were now captivated. She didn't say anything, but a small smile spread across her face. She knew talent when she saw it, and she recognized that this moment was something special. She had never seen the waitress in this light before. And it was clear that the music was not just beautiful, it was transforming the energy of the entire cafe. The waitress herself was aware of the growing attention, but she didn't let it distract her. She focused on the music, on the story she wanted to tell through the notes. Each key she pressed was filled with emotion memories, hopes, regrets, and dreams. She thought about the people who might be carrying burdens she couldn't see, the lonely customer in the corner, the stressed office worker with a tight schedule, the parents juggling responsibilities while trying to enjoy a brief moment of peace. She played for them, letting the music reach into their hearts and offer something they might not even realize they needed. Hours could have passed in those few minutes. The melody shifted and grew, moving from soft and tentative to strong and confident. She experimented with variations, letting her fingers explore the keys freely. There was a joy in improvisation, in allowing the music to surprise her as much as the listeners. Each note was a choice, each pause a message, each crescendo a declaration. She felt alive in a way that went beyond words, a deep, pure connection to the art she had loved for so long. The customers were completely absorbed now. Some had tears in their eyes, some smiled softly, and others simply sat in awe, unsure of how to react but unable to look away. The cafe had become more than a place to eat or drink. It had become a space where something human and real was happening. The music had created a bond among strangers, a shared experience that would linger long after the last note faded. She caught glimpses of faces around the room and felt a surge of gratitude. It was not about fame or recognition, it was about connection. In that moment, she realized why she had returned to the piano, why she had risked stepping out of her routine. Music was her voice, and for a few minutes it had spoken clearly and powerfully to everyone in the room. It reminded her that even ordinary lives could hold extraordinary moments, if one had the courage to embrace them. As the melody continued, she noticed a young woman at a nearby table wiping a tear from her cheek. A man across the room was holding his breath, completely absorbed. A child was leaning on the table, eyes wide, imagining worlds beyond the cafe walls. The impact of her music was real and tangible, and it filled her with a sense of wonder she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer just a waitress, she was a storyteller, a connector, a creator of beauty in a world that often forgot to notice it. For a moment, she thought about stopping, about returning to the ordinary work of the day. But something inside her urged her to keep going, to let the music flow as long as it would. She realized that the piano had been waiting for this moment, just as she had been waiting. The music and the moment were intertwined, creating something unique and unforgettable. The cafe, once filled with scattered noise and movement, had become still. Every person present was caught in the spell of the music, and she felt a quiet pride that was not about herself but about the shared experience. She had taken a chance, and in doing so had created something beautiful that touched everyone around her. It was a reminder that ordinary lives could hold extraordinary gifts, hidden until the right moment revealed them. As the final notes of her first extended piece faded into silence, the room was quiet for a heartbeat. Then slowly people began to react. Soft claps, murmurs of admiration, wide eyes, and smiles that spoke of awe and gratitude. The energy in the cafe had shifted, transformed by something unexpected. For a brief moment, a simple waitress had created magic, and everyone had felt it. She sat back, hands resting lightly on the keys, breathing deeply. Her heart was still racing, but in a different way, full, warm, and alive. She had faced her fear, embraced her passion, and shared it with the world, even if just with the small audience in the cafe. And in doing so, she realized something important. Life could be ordinary, but moments like this could make it extraordinary. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing for certain: she would never let music go silent again. After the first piece, she felt a rush of courage she hadn't experienced in years. The applause had been soft but genuine, a recognition of something real. She looked around at the cafe and saw faces full of curiosity, wonder, and admiration. Some people were still leaning forward, eyes glued to the piano, as if afraid to blink and miss a single note. Others whispered to each other quietly, exchanging surprised glances and smiles. The air itself seemed to change, charged with a sense of possibility. As though something extraordinary had seeped into the ordinary, she took a deep breath and let her fingers hover over the keys again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She began a new melody, one that felt bolder, stronger, and more confident. The notes flowed smoothly, weaving together a story of hope, longing, and joy. Each chord seemed to resonate beyond the piano, reaching into the hearts of everyone in the room. It was as if the music had a life of its own, carrying the emotions she felt but could not put into words. Around her, the cafe had gone almost silent. Plates were forgotten, conversations paused, and the usual clatter of cups and spoons had faded into the background. People were watching her with a kind of reverence, captivated by the way she seemed to lose herself in the music while simultaneously sharing it with them. The shy, quiet waitress who had once moved unnoticed through the cafe had transformed before their eyes into a storyteller, a weaver of emotions and a force that could make the ordinary extraordinary. Her fingers moved faster now, confident and precise, yet every note carried a softness, a vulnerability that made it human. She played not just with skill, but with heart, letting her emotions guide her. There were moments of quiet reflection, soft and gentle, followed by bursts of energy, lively and bright. The music had a rhythm, a pulse, a story that built with every passing second. And as she played, she noticed something remarkable. The cafe was responding. Customers leaned closer, some with tears welling in their eyes, others with wide smiles, all caught in the flow of the melody. A young man who had been scrolling on his phone now sat upright, staring at the piano in disbelief. A mother held her child a little tighter, sharing a quiet moment of awe together. Even the cafe owner had stopped her usual tasks, watching with a smile that spoke of pride and amazement. No one moved for a while, as if afraid that any distraction would break the spell. The music had become more than notes. It had become a shared experience, a moment of connection that went beyond language. She allowed herself to feel the emotions as they rose within her. Memories of past struggles, small victories, heartbreaks, and fleeting joys all found their way into the music. Each note was a piece of her story, shared openly and honestly. She realized that playing the piano was not just about technique, it was about honesty, about letting herself be seen and letting others feel. And as she continued, she saw how powerful that could be. People responded not to perfection but to truth, to the raw emotion that came from a place deep inside her. The melody shifted again, moving from soft, gentle chords to a faster, more energetic sequence. She experimented with dynamics, letting some notes linger while others rushed forward. There was a freedom in improvisation, a thrill in allowing the music to surprise her as much as it surprised the listeners. She laughed softly to herself at times, caught up in the joy of rediscovering a part of herself she thought had been lost forever. The piano had become an extension of her voice, expressing what she could not say out loud. Around her, the reactions were becoming more pronounced. A woman at the back was wiping tears quietly, her expression a mixture of wonder and relief. A young boy, who had been fidgeting restlessly earlier, now sat completely still, eyes wide and focused. Even the regular customers who had seen her every day without noticing anything special were now fully engaged, astonished by the depth and emotion in her playing. It was as if they were seeing her for the first time, realizing that behind the quiet exterior of a simple waitress lay a world of talent and passion. She noticed one elderly man sitting alone near the window. He had been quiet and reserved, sipping his tea slowly, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. But as the music reached him, she saw a change in his posture. His shoulders relaxed, his hands rested on his knees, and a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but she recognized it. Music had reached him, touched him, and made a difference in his day. That realization filled her with warmth, reinforcing why she had chosen to play despite her doubts and fears. Her confidence continued to grow with every passing moment. The notes were flowing effortlessly now, as if the piano had been waiting all these years for her to return. She began to play more boldly, exploring melodies she hadn't attempted in years. Each movement of her fingers was precise yet full of expression, a delicate balance of control and freedom. She felt alive, fully immersed in the present, and yet connected to a lifetime of experiences that had shaped her. The atmosphere in the cafe had transformed completely. Where there had been background chatter, clinking dishes, and the bustle of daily life, now there was only the music and the shared silence of an audience captivated by it. People leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the narrative unfolding on the piano. Some whispered softly to their neighbors, unable to contain their admiration, while others simply listened, letting the music wash over them. The ordinary cafe had become a place of wonder, a space where a simple act could create something extraordinary. She paused briefly, catching her breath, and allowed the final chord to linger in the air. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her, savoring the moment before reality slowly crept back. When she lifted her hands from the keys, there was a moment of silence, a suspended pause as if everyone needed to process what had just happened. Then slowly soft claps began to rise, followed by more, until the cafe was filled with a chorus of applause, cheers. and murmurs of astonishment. The warmth that spread through her was unlike anything she had felt in a long time. It was not about being recognized or praised. It was about connection, about knowing that the music had touched others in a meaningful way. She looked around at the people who had been watching, and their expressions told her everything. Surprise, admiration, joy, and even a little awe reflected back at her, showing that the courage to play had been worth it. For a moment, she allowed herself to smile, letting the emotion settle in. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, a quiet pride that was different from anything she had experienced before. It wasn't about the applause or recognition. It was about reclaiming a part of herself, sharing it honestly, and seeing the effect it had on others. She realized that life was full of moments like this, if only one was brave enough to step out of the ordinary and embrace them. The cafe owner approached quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Without saying a word, the gesture communicated approval and admiration. She felt a sense of validation, not for herself, but for the courage it took to share her talent openly. In that simple touch, she felt a connection, a silent acknowledgement that what she had done mattered. The owner's eyes reflected pride and awe, confirming what she had suspected all along. The music had created a moment that would linger in everyone's memory. As she sat back at the piano, letting the notes die down, she noticed the subtle changes in the room. Conversations had resumed, but in a softer, more reflective tone. Customers who had been rushing through their day were now lingering, savoring their coffee, sharing quiet smiles, and exchanging knowing glances. The music had shifted the energy of the cafe, creating a sense of calm and connection that had been missing before. It was a reminder of the power of art, of emotion, and of simply being human. Her mind wandered briefly to the future. She didn't know what would come next, whether she would play again, whether anyone would remember this moment, whether her life would change in any significant way. But she understood something deeper. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had embraced the courage to do something she loved. And in doing so, she had touched the lives of others. That was a reward far greater than recognition or fame. The young boy near the piano was still staring, completely absorbed, and she caught his eye for a brief moment. He smiled shyly, and she returned the gesture, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It was a simple connection, but it felt profound. Music had created a bridge between them, between herself and everyone in the cafe. It was a reminder that even small, quiet actions could have a powerful impact. Her fingers lingered over the keys one last time, as if saying goodbye for now. The piano had been silent for years, but it had not forgotten her. And she had not forgotten it. In this brief, ordinary cafe, an extraordinary moment had unfolded, one that would remain in memory for a long time. The music had transformed her, the space, and the people around her, creating a shared experience of beauty, wonder, and connection. She rose from the piano, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through her. The cafe had returned to its normal rhythm, but nothing felt quite the same. People were still smiling, still talking softly, and still casting glances toward the piano. She had done more than play. She had reminded everyone, including herself, of the power of courage, passion, and authenticity. And in that moment, she knew that, The cafe had settled into a quiet hum after her previous piece, but she felt a surge of energy she couldn't ignore. Her hands itched to play again, and her heart beat faster with anticipation. Something inside her told her this was the moment to let go completely, not just to play, but to pour everything she had into the music. She took a deep breath, sat back at the piano, and allowed herself to feel every emotion building inside. This was no longer just about playing for herself. It was about sharing a story, a feeling, a moment that could reach everyone in the room. She began slowly, letting the first few notes ring out clearly, each one filled with intention and care. The melody was soft at first, gentle, drawing listeners in like a whisper. But there was an underlying strength to it, a quiet determination that hinted at something bigger waiting to unfold. Her fingers moved naturally, dancing across the keys with a grace born from years of practice. And yet each note carried a raw, human touch that made it impossible to ignore. As the music grew, The cafe seemed to transform around her. The usual noises, the clatter of cups, the murmur of conversation, the footsteps of waitstaff faded into silence. Every ear turned toward the piano, every pair of eyes focused on the simple waitress who had captured the room with sound alone. It was as if the ordinary walls of the cafe had disappeared, leaving only her, the piano, and the audience held spellbound by the emotion in her hands. Her melody shifted again, building slowly, climbing with each note like a story reaching its climax. She played with intention, with emotion, letting every chord speak of hope, longing, and resilience. She remembered the moments in her own life that had shaped her, the challenges, the fears, the small victories that had kept her going, and let them flow into the music. Each note carried a piece of her soul, and she could feel the audience responding in kind. A woman sitting near the back, who had seemed distracted before, now leaned forward, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes shining with admiration. A young boy at a corner table had stopped fidgeting entirely, his gaze fixed on the piano as if he were watching a story unfold. Even those who had been quietly chatting earlier were now silent, drawn in by the intensity of the performance. It wasn't just music they were hearing, it was emotion, honesty, and a connection they hadn't expected to feel in a simple cafe. Her fingers flew over the keys. Faster now, more confident, yet every movement remained purposeful. The music swelled, rising and falling with dramatic tension, carrying with it the weight of emotion she had kept locked inside for years. She allowed herself to feel everything: the joy, the nervousness, the memories of her past, the longing for something more, and she let it all flow freely into the melody. The piano became an extension of her, speaking for her in ways words never could. Around her, reactions grew more pronounced. A man sitting with a cup of coffee near the window was leaning forward, eyes wide, completely absorbed. A couple at a nearby table held hands, sharing a quiet moment of awe together. Even the cafe owner, usually reserved and busy, stood behind the counter, watching with a mixture of pride and amazement. No one had moved for several minutes, and it felt as if the entire room existed solely to witness the music that now filled it. She noticed something remarkable. The energy in the room seemed to flow with the music. It was almost tangible, like a current connecting every person present. People who had been strangers moments ago now shared a silent understanding, a bond formed through the beauty of the moment. Some were moved to tears, others to quiet smiles, and all were captivated by the courage it had taken for her to let herself be seen and heard. The melody shifted again, softer now, with a tenderness that made listeners lean in, as if trying to catch every subtle nuance. She played a passage that was delicate and fragile, each note carrying a sense of vulnerability. She remembered the times she had doubted herself, the moments when fear had held her back, and she let all of it flow into the music. There was power in the honesty of her expression, a truth that resonated with everyone who was listening. The cafe had become a space unlike any other. The ordinary chairs, tables, and counters seemed to fade away, replaced by the emotional landscape she was creating with every note. People were no longer customers or strangers, they were participants in a shared experience, connected by the beauty and vulnerability of her performance. She realized that what she was doing went beyond music. It was creating a human connection that could be felt by everyone, regardless of who they were or what they had come to the cafe to do. Her confidence grew as the music reached its peak. She played faster now, her fingers flying over the keys with a mix of precision and freedom. The notes rose and fell in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes bold, each phrase telling a part of the story she had been holding inside for so long. She could feel the audience leaning into every movement, their attention rapt, their emotions rising and falling with hers. It was a moment of pure connection, a shared experience that felt almost sacred. A young woman sitting near the front whispered to her friend, eyes wide, "I can't believe she's playing like this." "She's amazing." The friend nodded, unable to speak, tears welling in her eyes. Across the room, an elderly man who had been quietly sipping his tea had his hands resting lightly on the table, a soft smile on his face. She noticed him and gave a small nod, feeling a silent connection through the music. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had returned to the piano, why she had dared to play despite her fears. The music shifted once more, slower now, more reflective. She played with a tenderness that contrasted beautifully with the energy of the earlier passages. Each note seemed to float in the air, lingering just long enough to let the audience feel its depth. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the years of quiet work, the sacrifices, the doubts, and the small moments of joy. All of it found its way into the music, and she felt a sense of release, a lightness that came from finally allowing herself to be seen and heard. People began to respond in subtle but meaningful ways. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned closer to the piano, captivated by the emotion in every note. The young boy had tears in his eyes, but they were not sad. They were a reflection of awe and wonder. The cafe owner, still standing quietly behind the counter, had a hand over her heart, clearly moved by the power of the moment. The room was transformed, and she could feel it, almost like a wave of energy flowing through her and everyone present. She continued to play, feeling the story unfolding beneath her fingers. Each note was intentional, each chord a message. She didn't need words. The music spoke for her, conveying the emotions she had carried inside for so long. There was joy, sadness, longing, and hope, all intertwined in a melody that seemed to resonate with every listener. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, fully immersed in the present while connected to her past and the people around her. As the music built toward the final section, she allowed herself to play with abandon. She let go of any hesitation, any fear, and simply became one with the piano. The notes rose and fell with intensity, filling every corner of the cafe, leaving no one untouched. The room seemed to vibrate with emotion, a shared energy that connected her to the audience in a way that was both powerful and humbling. The final notes approached, and she allowed them to linger, holding the last chord with a gentle touch that resonated through the room. There was a moment of silence, a pause where time itself seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly the cafe erupted, not in loud chaos, but in a wave of applause, cheers, and soft murmurs of admiration. People were on their feet, clapping, smiling, and wiping tears from their eyes. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and joy. She sat back, hands resting lightly on the keys, her heart pounding, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The cafe had returned to its usual rhythm, but the air still felt different, charged with the memory of the performance, the shared experience, and the human connection that had been created. People continued to talk softly, exchanging smiles and comments about the music they had just heard. Even the regulars who had been there every day without noticing much seemed to see her in a new light. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. This moment, this music, this connection, it was more than she could have imagined. She had taken a risk, allowed herself to be vulnerable, and shared a part of herself that had been hidden for too long. And in doing so, she had touched the lives of everyone in the room. Even if just for a few minutes, for the first time in years, she realized that life could hold moments like this, extraordinary, transformative, and unforgettable, even in the most ordinary of places. She smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning, that the piano, the music, and the courage to play would continue to shape her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. After the applause had died down, she remained at the piano for a few seconds, letting the energy of the room settle. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, still tingling from the music she had just created. She could feel her heart pounding, not from fear this time, but from exhilaration. It was a different kind of rush, one that came from having shared something deeply personal and having it embraced by others. Around her, people were still murmuring softly, exchanging looks that reflected awe, admiration, and something else, something unspoken that went beyond words. She slowly rose from the piano bench, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and elation. Her legs felt heavy, but her spirit felt light, as if a weight she hadn't realized she had been carrying had been lifted. She glanced around the cafe and noticed the subtle changes. People were smiling in ways they hadn't been before, some still leaning slightly forward as if hoping the music might return. The young boy at the corner table had his mouth slightly open, eyes wide, still absorbing everything he had just witnessed. The woman near the back dabbed at her eyes, clearly moved by the performance. Even the cafe owner, who had been watching quietly, approached her now with a gentle, proud smile. There was no need for words. Her expression alone communicated admiration and gratitude. She placed a hand on her shoulder, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. In that instant she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as a part of the cafe's daily routine, but as someone with talent, passion, and courage. It was a recognition she had longed for silently. One she had never expected to receive in such an ordinary place. The patrons began to return to their normal activities slowly, but there was a noticeable difference in the air. Conversations were softer, more reflective, more attentive. People lingered at their tables, reluctant to leave the space that had just been transformed by the music. Some exchanged quiet smiles with strangers, a subtle acknowledgement of the shared experience they had just been part of. The cafe itself felt different, alive in a way it hadn't been before. It wasn't just a place to eat or drink anymore. It had become a space where ordinary people could witness something extraordinary, something human and real. She began to clear her mind, thinking about what had just happened. The courage it had taken to play, the doubts she had battled, the fear of being judged, did all seem to fade in comparison to the joy and connection she had felt. She realized that this moment was bigger than herself. It wasn't about recognition, fame, or validation. It was about touching lives, creating an experience that others would carry with them long after they left the cafe. That understanding filled her with a quiet sense of pride and humility. As she returned to her usual duties, serving coffee and clearing tables, she noticed small gestures from the customers that spoke louder than words. A nod of approval here, a soft smile there, a lingering look that said, "I saw you, and what you did mattered." These simple acknowledgments were more meaningful than any applause or praise. They were proof that her music had reached people in a way nothing else could, that her courage had created ripples in the lives of those who had witnessed it. The young boy's mother approached her as she wiped down a table near the piano. She spoke softly, almost reverently, expressing her gratitude for the music and the emotion it had shared. The boy stood quietly beside her, eyes wide and shining, as if he had glimpsed something magical. The waitress smiled, her heart warming at the interaction. She realized that even the smallest gestures, playing a song, sharing a moment, could create profound effects, especially on those who might not often encounter beauty or wonder in their daily lives. The day went on. The cafe slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the performance lingered. People spoke softly about the music, sharing their impressions and feelings with one another. Some lingered longer than usual, unwilling to leave the magic behind. Others returned later, hoping for another chance to hear the melody again. Even those who had arrived late, unaware of what had transpired, could sense the change in the atmosphere. The cafe had been transformed, and everyone who had been present carried a piece of that moment with them. She found herself reflecting on her own journey. The years she had spent away from the piano, the doubts, the fears, and the responsibilities that had pulled her away from her passion. She realized that those years had not been wasted. They had led her to this precise moment, teaching her patience, humility, and the value of quiet determination. She understood that life was not about avoiding fear or waiting for perfect conditions. It was about embracing opportunities, even when they seemed small or uncertain. A few regular customers approached her, offering words of appreciation and surprise at her talent. Some were polite, some were enthusiastic, but all were genuine. One elderly man, who had been quiet throughout the performance, simply shook her hand and smiled warmly. She felt a sense of connection with him that went beyond words. It was a reminder that the impact of her music extended far beyond the notes themselves. It was about the emotions, the moments, and the shared human experience. She returned to the piano one last time that day. Not to perform, but simply to touch the keys and remember the feeling. The instrument had been silent for so long, and now it felt alive again, a partner in the journey she had rediscovered. She pressed a few keys softly, listening to the familiar sound that had always been a part of her, even when she had ignored it. The piano had not forgotten her, and she had not forgotten it. In that quiet moment, she felt a sense of completeness and gratitude for the path that had led her here. As the cafe began to empty, she noticed small details she had overlooked before: the warmth of the sunlight through the windows, the way shadows fell across the wooden tables, the faint smell of coffee and pastries mingling in the air. Everything seemed more vivid, more alive, more connected to the moment she had just created. It was a reminder that extraordinary experiences often emerge from ordinary places, and that magic could be found when one had the courage to embrace it. By the end of her shift, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had stepped out of her routine, faced her fears, and shared a piece of herself with the world. The cafe would return to normal, customers would come and go, and life would continue. But the memory of that day would linger for her, and for everyone who had witnessed it. She had created a moment that no one would forget, a memory that would live on in their hearts long after the last note had faded. She paused at the door as she prepared to leave, looking back at the piano in the corner. The instrument seemed to shine softly in the fading light, a silent witness to the transformation that had occurred. She smiled, knowing that this was not the end, but a beginning, a reminder that courage, passion, and authenticity could create moments of beauty and connection in even the most ordinary places. She left the cafe with a light step, her heart full, knowing that the day had changed her life in ways she would carry forever. The story of that afternoon would ripple quietly, invisibly, through the lives of those who had been present. The young boy might remember it as a spark of inspiration, the elderly man as a reminder of the beauty in everyday life, and the woman who had been moved to tears as a sign that hope and joy could still be found. And she, the simple waitress who had dared to play, would carry the memory as a source of strength, courage, and renewed purpose. Even after leaving the cafe, she found herself humming the melody softly, the music lingering in her mind and soul. It reminded her that talent and passion, when embraced, could create moments of profound impact, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. She realized that life was full of opportunities to connect, to inspire, and to create beauty even in the smallest, most unexpected ways. That evening, as she closed the door behind her, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The day had started like any other, routine and ordinary, but it had become unforgettable. She had discovered that her music had power, that her courage had meaning, and that one moment, shared honestly and fully, could touch the lives of many. She smiled, feeling grateful for the piano, for the cafe, and for the courage that had led her to that simple, extraordinary moment. And though the world outside continued on its usual pace, she knew that something inside her had changed forever. She would never forget the way the music had flowed through her hands, the way it had captured the hearts of everyone in the room, and the way it had reminded her of who she truly was. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a creator of moments that mattered. And in that realization, she felt a quiet joy that would stay with her for the rest of her life.